Michael Jackson was sitting on the floor of a hallway at 2 in the morning when he heard it. Not the finished thing, the broken version of it. Someone behind a closed door running the same 8 bars over and over, stopping in the same spot every time. Like a car that keeps turning over and never quite catches. He'd been on his way out. His own session had wrapped an hour ago. He had his jacket in one hand and his bag over his shoulder, and a car waiting somewhere in the lot below. He stopped anyway. He sat down on the floor, back against the wall, jacket across his knees, and listened. Late-night recording studios have a specific quality that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't spent real time in them. The air is different, recycled, climate-controlled, cut off from whatever the city outside is doing. Time moves at a different rate. 2 in the morning feels the same as 11 at night, which feels the same as 4 in the afternoon. The carpet in the hallway was dark blue and worn in the center from years of people pacing the same stretch between sessions. A paper cup sat against the baseboard 10 feet down, left there by someone who'd moved on hours ago. The year was 1980. Record Plant Studios, Los Angeles. Michael was 21. Off the Wall had been out for almost a year, which meant people were starting to have opinions about what came next. And some of those opinions had already made their way back to him through the usual channels. Label people, publicists, the particular kind of silence that takes over a room when someone thinks better of finishing a sentence. The record had done well. Whether that was enough depended entirely on who was doing the math and what they were comparing it to. He wasn't thinking about any of that in the hallway. He was listening. The piano line coming through the door was clean, patient, the kind of structure that takes a long time to build and sounds like it arrived naturally. But something in it was missing, not a wrong note. The notes were all correct, more like a room where someone had framed all 4 walls and forgotten to put in one of them. Everything stood up. The wind still came through. He heard the gap on the first pass. He located it on the second. By the 4th time the track stopped in the exact same place, he already knew what should go there. Not from working through it intellectually. He heard it the way you hear the end of someone's sentence before they get there. He sat with it for a while longer. The corridor was quiet except for the sound coming through the door. That piano, the low hum of the building's ventilation, and occasionally a voice saying something short on the other side. He wasn't going to knock. That's not something you do at 2 in the morning on someone else's session. He sat there because he wasn't ready to leave. Then the music cut off completely. A few seconds of muffled conversation, then footsteps, and the door opened and the hallway filled up with the people who were not Stevie Wonder. Engineers, an assistant, someone in a cap carrying a heavy case with both hands. They came out in 2s and 3s. A couple of them nodded at Michael without stopping. One of them recognized him, did a small double take, and kept moving. This was a building where you didn't make a thing of who you saw in the corridor. The last person out pulled the door mostly closed behind him, not latched, just resting. Michael stood up. He held his jacket. He looked at the door for a moment, and then at the hallway stretching out toward the exit, and then back at the door. He knocked. 2 knuckles once. The kind of knock that gives a person the option to pretend they didn't hear it. Stevie Wonder heard it. "Who's there?" "Someone who heard the session," Michael said. "Through the door. I wasn't trying to listen." A pause. "What did you hear?" There were a few ways to answer that. Michael chose the direct one. "I heard where it stops working." A longer pause this time. "Come in." The room was dim. 1 lamp on above the piano, warm and low, the kind of light that makes 2 in the morning feel exactly like what it is. Stevie was still at the bench, hands resting on his knees, not on the keys. He had a particular stillness to him, not inert, but fully assembled. The posture of someone whose ears do the work that most people assign to their eyes. Michael let the door close behind him and stood there for a moment before saying anything. He wasn't sure how to begin, so he started with what he could see. "Tell me what you hear," Stevie said. Michael walked to the glass and looked through into the live room. 1 microphone standing alone in the center, no adjustments, exactly where whoever had last used it left it. He looked at the console, then the piano, then back at Stevie. "The bass and the melody are both generating the same type of tension," he said. "That tension needs somewhere to go. Right now, there's nothing for it to land on. The song builds to something and then it just ends. Stevie didn't move. He was listening the way he listened to music. The same full attention. No difference between the two. 3 bars in, right before the chord wants to change, there's a space. A voice could live in it, but if it comes in on the beat, it closes the gap before the listener has time to feel it open. It needs to arrive just before, something between the existing notes, not sitting on top of them. Stevie's hands came off his knees and went back to the keys. He played the passage once slowly. He stopped in the same place it had always stopped. "Show me," he said. Michael went into the live room. He didn't ask about the headphone mix or where the engineer wanted him positioned. He picked up the headphones from the stool beside the microphone, put them on and stood there while the room settled. The track came up. He listened through the first 2 bars to get his bearings. There's a moment in a recording booth right before you open your mouth, where everything goes very quiet inside. Not nervous exactly, more like the second before you step off a curb. The last instant where the ground is still certain beneath you. In the 3rd bar, when the space opened, he stepped into it. One line. Not a harmony on the chord, not a counter melody. Something smaller than both. A pitch held between 2 existing notes, arriving just slightly ahead of the beat, giving the chord underneath it something to move toward. He held it for exactly as long as it needed to be held. Then he let it go, and the track moved forward on its own. The track kept playing. Behind the glass, Stevie Wonder sat completely still, both hands flat on the wood above the keys, not playing, not moving. The engineer, who had wrapped and left 20 minutes earlier, came back through the side door. He'd left his phone on the console. He opened the door, saw Stevie motionless at the piano, heard what was coming through the monitors, and sat down at the board without saying a word. He reached for the record button and pressed it. Michael came back out of the live room and set the headphones down on the stool. He wasn't sure whether to stay or go. He'd done the thing he came in to do. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it and stood there holding it. Stevie spoke before he could decide. "I knew it was you," he said, not as a revelation, as something he'd been sitting with since the knock on the door. "Not from your face. I heard you stop in the hallway the first time, when you sat down out there. There's a rhythm to how you move. I've paid attention to it at other sessions, at shows. It's particular to you." Michael didn't say anything to that. "Why did you stay?" Stevie asked. "You could have just kept walking. I wanted to see if you were going to find it yourself. And when you could tell I wasn't, I knocked." Stevie laughed, a short one, real and unperformed. They stayed in the room for another 2 hours, not working exactly, talking about the song, about what it was reaching for, about the distance between a part that decorates a record and a part that finishes it. Stevie would play something and ask what Michael heard. Michael answered without softening anything, which Stevie seemed to prefer over being handled with care. At some point, Stevie said, "You hear the inside of things." Michael said, "So do you." "I had to develop that out of necessity." He paused. "You came in already listening." Michael looked at the piano for a moment. He thought about all the hallways he'd sat in over the years, all the sessions he'd watched from the doorway without being invited, just trying to understand how people who were further along than him made the decisions they made, how they knew when something was done, how they knew when it wasn't. "I don't know if that's true," he said. "I think I just spent a lot of time listening in places where people didn't notice I was doing it." He left around 4 in the morning. He walked out through the lobby, out through the glass doors, and stood in the parking lot for a minute before getting into the car. The air was cold and the lot was mostly empty, and the city made its usual low noise in the distance. A street lamp buzzed somewhere above him. He stood there for a moment, not doing anything, not reviewing what had happened or deciding what it meant. Sometimes a thing just needs a minute before you put it away. Then he got in. He didn't tell anyone about the session, not his manager, not his assistant, not anyone at the label. He went back to his own work the next morning and picked up where he'd left off. The finished version of the song, with the line Michael had tracked that night, came out the following year. It didn't need a story attached to it to work. It worked on its own. But the people who'd been in that building knew, and word traveled the way it always travels in a small industry full of people who pay close attention to this kind of thing. Quincy Jones heard about it from the engineer, the one who'd come back for his phone. Quincy had been looking for the right moment to have a conversation he'd been turning over in his mind for months. When he heard what had happened at Record Plant, he stopped turning it over. He called Michael a few days later. He didn't bring up the session directly. He said he wanted to talk about what came after Off the Wall, about the next record, about what Michael actually wanted to do with it, about what it should be. That conversation eventually became Thriller. Years later, in an interview, Stevie Wonder was asked to name the most musical person he'd ever shared a room with. He didn't answer right away. The interviewer thought he was going through a list. He was probably just deciding how much to say. There was a night at Record Plant, he said. Someone knocked on my studio door at 2 in the morning and told me where my song was broken. I knew who it was before he said a word. I recognized him from the hallway, from the way he stopped outside the door. The interviewer asked what gave it away. Stevie smiled. The way he stopped. Most people walk past a closed door. He stopped and he sat down and he listened. That's the part nobody talks about enough. Everyone talks about what Michael could do. Not enough people talk about what he could hear. Michael Jackson knocked on a door he had no reason to knock on, in a hallway he was passing through on his way to somewhere else, at 2 in the morning, in a year when the people around him were still deciding whether Off the Wall had been a beginning or a ceiling. He didn't go in to be needed. He didn't go in to be seen. He heard something incomplete and knew what the missing piece was. It seemed like a waste not to say so. That's the whole story. It's also everything. When did you last stop for something that wasn't yours to fix and turn out to be exactly the right person to fix it? Drop it in the comments.